Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Grab a blanket, maybe a cup of tea or coffee, and make yourself comfortable. Because today's story is something special. It's a story about the shadows of the city, about danger, and about the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you're standing in the dark. But before we begin, if you enjoy these BL storytelling videos and want to support the continuation of this channel, you can join my Patreon, SpicyTimeBL. As you probably know, YouTube does not always make it easy to monetize this kind of content. So Patreon really helps me keep creating these long, immersive stories for you. You can find the link in the description and the pinned comment. And for those who want the continuation of the videos, bonus scenes, early access, and more uncensored 18+ BL content, SpicyTimeBL is exactly where you can find it. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's just take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you want to. Imagine a city that never really sleeps, a city where the neon lights reflect in the puddles on the asphalt, and the sound of distant sirens is just the background music of everyday life. Down in the Lower East District, tucked away behind a rusted metal door in an alleyway that most people try to avoid, was Elias. Elias Thorne was 26 years old. He was a doctor, but not the kind you'd find walking the brightly lit, sterile hallways of a downtown hospital. No, Elias had walked away from that life. He had his reasons: bureaucracy, the system, the tragic loss of a patient he wasn't allowed to save because of insurance. Whatever the reason, Elias now ran an underground clinic. He patched up the people who couldn't afford to go to a real hospital, or the people who couldn't risk being asked questions. He was incredibly skilled. He had steady hands, a quiet demeanor, and a strict moral code. No weapons in the clinic, and no fighting inside. Once you crossed his threshold, you were a patient, nothing more. It was a Tuesday night, 2 a.m. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the frosted glass windows of his clinic. Elias was sitting at his metal desk, nursing a cup of terrible, lukewarm black coffee, reviewing some medical supply inventory. He was exhausted. There were dark circles under his deep brown eyes, and his white lab coat was draped over the back of his chair. He was just a guy trying to do some good in a very bad world. Suddenly, the heavy iron door of the clinic didn't just open. It was violently kicked in. Elias jumped up, his heart hammering in his chest, as three large men in soaked, expensive dark suits shoved their way into his tiny waiting room. They were panicking, but it wasn't because they were scared of the police. It was because the man they were half carrying between them was bleeding out. "Doctor, we need a doctor right now," one of the men shouted, his voice echoing off the tile walls. He had a hand pressed to his waist, clearly revealing the handle of a pistol tucked into his belt. Elias froze for a split second. He knew exactly who these men were. You didn't live in this city without recognizing the sharp, tailored suits and the terrifying presence of the Moretti syndicate, the Mafia, and the man bleeding between them. Elias swallowed hard. It was Julian Moretti. Julian was 28. He was the underboss of the family, the cold, calculating, ruthless heir to an empire built on violence. Even half-conscious, pale, and covered in his own blood, Julian was terrifying. He was beautiful in a sharp, lethal kind of way. Jet black hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, sharp jawline, and piercing, ice-blue eyes that were currently blown wide with pain. He had been shot, badly, somewhere in the lower abdomen. "Put him on the table," Elias ordered, his voice surprisingly steady. His medical training kicked in, overriding his fear. Now, the men hauled Julian into the small operating room, laying him flat on the metal table. Blood was rapidly soaking through Julian's white dress shirt. "Save him, or you're dead. Do you understand me?" One of the guards snarled, grabbing Elias by the collar of his scrubs. Elias didn't flinch. He looked the guard dead in the eye, his own brown eyes flashing with sudden anger. "If you don't let go of me and get the hell out of my sterile room, he's going to die. You have 10 seconds to step outside and take your guns with you. That's my rule." The guard raised a fist, but before he could swing, a weak, raspy voice cut through the tension. "Marco." It was Julian. His ice-blue eyes were open, locking onto the guard. Even though he was bleeding to death, his voice carried an absolute, unquestionable authority. "Do what the doctor says. Step outside." Marco gritted his teeth, let go of Elias, and backed out of the room with the other men, slamming the door behind them. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He turned his attention to the mafia boss on his table. I'm going to have to cut your shirt open, Elias said, grabbing a pair of medical shears. Julian's lips twitched into a very faint, pained smirk. It's custom-made. Armani. I'll buy you a t-shirt, Elias muttered, slicing through the expensive fabric to reveal the wound. For the next 2 hours, the clinic was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor, the clinking of surgical instruments, and the sound of the rain outside. Elias was entirely focused. He worked with a desperate, beautiful grace. He removed the bullet, stopped the bleeding, and stitched the wound with meticulous care. And the whole time, Julian watched him. The local anesthetic Elias had given him numbed the pain, but Julian refused to be sedated entirely. He kept his heavy, half-lidded eyes fixed on Elias's face. He watched the way Elias's brow furrowed in concentration. He watched the way Elias's long, elegant fingers moved with total confidence. Julian was a man who lived in a world of liars, killers, and cowards. People were either terrified of him or they wanted to use him. But this doctor? This civilian with messy brown hair and tired eyes? He had looked a loaded gun in the face and told a mobster to wait in the hallway. Julian was fascinated. "You have very steady hands," Julian murmured, his voice low, rough from exhaustion. Elias didn't look up from his stitching. "Don't talk. It raises your heart rate." "You're not afraid of me," Julian noted, sounding genuinely curious. Elias paused, finally lifting his gaze. For a moment, time just stopped in that small, brightly lit room. Elias looked into Julian's ice-blue eyes, and the sheer intensity of the mafia boss's stare made Elias's breath catch in his throat. There was a heavy, magnetic pull in the air between them, something unspoken and deeply dangerous. "I'm afraid of a lot of things, Mr. Moretti," Elias said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But on this table, you're not a boss. You're just a man bleeding on my floor, and I don't let people die on my watch." Julian didn't say anything to that. He just stared at Elias, a strange, unreadable emotion flickering in his cold eyes. By the time Elias finished, it was nearly dawn. Julian's men came back in, helped their boss up, and quietly paid Elias a stack of cash so thick it could have kept the clinic running for a year. "We were never here," Marco said gruffly. "I don't know who you are," Elias replied smoothly, turning his back to clean his instruments. Before Julian was helped out the door, he stopped. He looked back at Elias, who was standing under the flickering fluorescent light. "I owe you my life, Dr. Thorne. I don't forget things like that." And then he was gone. For the next 3 weeks, Elias's life returned to normal. He patched up scraped knees, dealt with local kids who got into street fights, and drank his terrible coffee. He told himself the encounter with Julian Moretti was just a crazy night. It was over. He would never see the man again. He was wrong. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the bell above the clinic door chimed. Elias was sitting at the front desk, reading a medical journal. He looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. Julian Moretti was standing in his waiting room. He wasn't bleeding this time. He was dressed in a flawless, charcoal gray 3-piece suit. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he radiated an aura of quiet power that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. But he wasn't alone. He was holding 2 large, steaming cups of coffee from a very expensive cafe downtown. Elias slowly stood up. "Mr. Moretti, are your stitches tearing?" "No," Julian said smoothly, walking up to the desk. "They healed perfectly, thanks to you." He set one of the coffee cups down in front of Elias. "I noticed you drink absolute garbage, doctor. I thought I'd bring you an upgrade." Elias looked at the coffee, then up at the mob boss. "You drove all the way to the Lower East Side to bring me a latte?" Julian's lips curved into a very faint smile. "I take my debts seriously." "You already paid me," Elias pointed out, crossing his arms defensively, trying to ignore how incredibly handsome the man looked. "More than enough." "Money pays for the service," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, stepping just a fraction of an inch closer to the desk. "It doesn't pay for the fact that you saved my life. Drink the coffee, Elias." It was the first time Julian had used his first name, and the way it rolled off his tongue made a shiver run down Elias's spine. He hesitantly picked up the cup. It was warm. He took a sip and sighed despite himself. It was the best coffee he'd ever had. Over the next month, a bizarre routine developed. Once a week, Julian Moretti, the feared underboss of the city's most dangerous crime family, would walk into a rundown underground clinic just to bring a tired doctor coffee. At first, Elias was guarded. He kept his answers short. He tried to remain professional, but you can't sit across from someone week after week without the walls starting to crack. Julian would sit on the edge of the examination table, watching Elias organize his supplies. They started talking, not about the mafia, not about crime, but about life. Julian learned that Elias loved classical music and hated the summer heat. Elias learned that Julian was originally an art history major before his older brother died, forcing him into the family business. There were moments, quiet, intense moments, where the conversation would fade and they would just look at each other. One evening, Julian was watching Elias bandage the arm of an old homeless man who frequented the neighborhood. Julian stood in the corner, silent, observing the gentle, patient way Elias spoke to the old man, making sure he was comfortable. When the old man left, Julian stepped forward. "You give too much of yourself away," Julian noted softly. Elias wiped down the counter. "It's my job. Someone has to care about them." Julian stepped right up behind Elias, so close that Elias could feel the heat radiating off Julian's chest. He could smell Julian's cologne, a mix of bergamot, smoke, and expensive leather. Elias's breath hitched, and he froze, the cleaning rag still in his hand. Julian slowly reached out. His large, warm hand hovered over Elias's shoulder before he gently took the rag out of Elias's hand. Their fingers brushed, just a slight, accidental touch, but it felt like a spark of electricity shooting up Elias's arm. "You take care of everyone else," Julian murmured, leaning down so his voice was right by Elias's ear. The deep, rough timbre of it made Elias close his eyes for a second. "But who takes care of you, Elias?" Elias turned around slowly. They were inches apart. He looked up into Julian's blue eyes, and for the first time, he saw something incredibly vulnerable there, a deep, agonizing loneliness. "I don't need taking care of," Elias whispered, though his voice trembled just a little. Julian's eyes dropped down to Elias's lips for a fraction of a second, before moving back up to his eyes. The tension between them was so thick, so heavy with unspoken desire and fear, it was almost suffocating. "Everyone needs taking care of," Julian said softly. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers hesitating, before he gently tucked a stray lock of Elias's brown hair behind his ear. The touch was so tender, so completely at odds with the violent world Julian lived in, that it broke Elias's heart just a little. Before either of them could say another word, Julian's phone buzzed aggressively in his pocket. The spell was broken. Julian stepped back, his face immediately hardening back into the cold mask of the underboss. He answered the phone, listened for a few seconds, his jaw clenching. "I have to go," Julian said quietly, looking at Elias with a lingering reluctance. "Lock the door behind me. Don't let anyone in tonight." Elias watched him leave, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He touched the spot behind his ear where Julian's fingers had lingered. He was terrified, not of Julian, but of the fact that he was falling for him. Now, before we get into what happens next, because trust me, things are about to get incredibly intense, just a small reminder. If you want more story continuations, bonus scenes, early access, and uncensored 18+ BL content, you can support me on SpicyTimeBL. Your support keeps these stories alive. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Alright, let's get back to the shadows. The turning point happened 2 weeks later. The fragile bubble of peace they had created shattered. There was a rival syndicate in the city, the Rossi family. They had been trying to take over Julian's territory for months. And in the criminal underworld, rumors spread fast. Someone had noticed the underboss of the Moretti family making weekly, unescorted trips to a poor neighborhood. They realized Julian had a soft spot. They realized he had a weakness. It was a Friday night. Elias was locking up the clinic, pulling the heavy metal grate down over the door. The street was completely empty, illuminated only by a single flickering street lamp. Suddenly, a black SUV screeched around the corner, its headlights blinding Elias. The tires smoked as it stopped violently right in front of him. The doors flew open, and 4 men stepped out. They weren't Julian's men. "Dr. Thorne," one of them said, a cruel smile on his face. He racked the slide of a handgun. "Don't scream. Get in the car." Elias's blood ran cold. He backed up against the metal grate of his clinic. He knew if he got in that car, he was dead. Or worse, he would be used as bait to trap Julian. "I don't know what you want," Elias said, his voice remarkably steady despite the terror gripping his stomach. But I have no money. We don't want your money, Doc, the man sneered, stepping closer, grabbing Elias roughly by the arm. We want your boyfriend. Elias struggled, planting his feet, but the man was too strong. Let go of me, Elias shouted, panic finally breaking through. Just as the man raised his gun to hit Elias over the head, a gunshot rang out into the night. It was deafening. The man holding Elias gasped, dropping his gun, and collapsed to the pavement, clutching his knee. Elias stumbled back, his eyes wide in shock. From the shadows of the alley across the street, Julian stepped out. He wasn't wearing a suit tonight. He was wearing a dark trench coat, a suppressed pistol gripped firmly in his hand. His face, Elias had never seen him look like this. Julian looked like the devil himself. His eyes were completely void of emotion, cold, dead, and utterly terrifying. Get away from him, Julian said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, lethal promise. The remaining 3 Rossi men panicked. They raised their weapons, but Julian was faster. With terrifying precision, he fired 3 times. The men dropped their weapons, incapacitated, groaning on the ground. Julian didn't shoot to kill, but he made sure they wouldn't stand up anytime soon. Julian dropped the magazine from his gun, holstered it, and sprinted across the street. He practically slammed into Elias, grabbing him by the shoulders, his large hands gripping Elias so tightly it bruised. Are you hurt? Julian demanded, his voice shaking, completely losing his cool composure. Elias, look at me. Did they hurt you? Elias was hyperventilating, the adrenaline crashing through his system. He looked up at Julian, seeing the absolute panic in the mob boss's eyes. No, I'm okay. Julian, I'm okay. Julian let out a ragged breath, pulling Elias roughly against his chest. He wrapped his arms around the doctor, burying his face in Elias's neck. Elias froze for a second, then slowly, instinctively, wrapped his arms around Julian's waist, clinging to him. Julian was trembling. The terrifying, untouchable underboss was trembling, holding Elias like he was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. I'm sorry, Julian whispered against Elias's skin, his breath hot and ragged. I'm so sorry. They found out about you. They were going to use you to get to me. Julian pulled back, his hands moving to cup Elias's face. His thumbs gently stroked Elias's cheekbones. You can't stay here. It's not safe. You're coming with me. What? No, my clinic, my patients. Elias, if you stay here, they will kill you, Julian yelled, his voice cracking with raw emotion. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against Elias's. The intimacy of the gesture in the middle of a dark, bloody street was staggering. Please, Julian begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Please, I can't lose you. Let me protect you. Elias looked at the desperation in Julian's face. He knew he was crossing a line of no return. If he went with Julian, he wasn't just the doctor anymore. He was part of Julian's world. He was choosing the darkness because the man he was falling in love with was standing in it. Elias swallowed hard, looking deeply into Julian's eyes. Okay, he whispered. Take me with you. Julian whisked Elias away to his heavily fortified penthouse in the center of the city. It was a fortress of glass, steel, and luxury, guarded by heavily armed men. For the next week, Elias was virtually a prisoner, though Julian treated him like royalty. Living together shifted everything. The tension between them was no longer confined to a 30-minute coffee visit. It was constant. It was waking up in the morning and seeing Julian in the kitchen wearing just sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy, making coffee. It was sitting on the couch late at night, reading books while Julian reviewed security footage, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Elias saw the toll Julian's life took on him. He saw the dark bags under Julian's eyes, the way he would flinch at sudden noises, the sheer exhaustion of always looking over his shoulder. One night, the tension finally boiled over. It was late, past midnight. Elias couldn't sleep. He walked out to the massive balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline. The wind was cool. A moment later, he heard the sliding glass door open, and Julian stepped out, holding 2 glasses of amber whiskey. Julian handed one to Elias without a word. They stood side by side, looking out at the city. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, Julian said quietly, staring straight ahead. You were living a good life, a quiet life. I ruined it. Elias looked down at his glass. You didn't drag me anywhere, Julian. I chose to get in the car. You shouldn't have, Julian said, his voice hardening with self-hatred. I'm dangerous, Elias. I'm a bad man. The things I've done, the blood on my hands. You heal people. I destroy them. I don't deserve to even stand next to you. Elias frowned. He set his glass down on the balcony railing and turned to fully face Julian. Don't tell me what you deserve. I get to decide who I care about. Julian finally turned to look at him, his blue eyes dark with intense longing and frustration. You don't understand. The closer you get to me, the more danger you are in. I am trying to keep you safe from me. I don't want to be safe from you? Elias finally snapped, the emotion he had been burying for weeks bubbling to the surface. He stepped closer to Julian, eliminating the space between them. I know who you are, I know what you do, but I also know the man who brought me coffee every week, just to make sure I was okay. I know the man who was trembling in the street because he was afraid I got hurt. You think you're a monster, Julian? Fine, but you're not a monster to me. Julian stared at him, his chest heaving. The silence stretched between them, thick, electric, and desperate. Elias, Julian warned, his voice a low, ragged growl. If you step any closer to me right now, I am not going to be able to stop myself. I won't be able to let you go, ever. Elias didn't hesitate. He took the final step forward. He reached up, placing his hands flat against Julian's chest, feeling the frantic, hammering heartbeat beneath his palms. He looked up, his brown eyes filled with total trust and fierce loyalty. Then don't let me go, Elias whispered. Julian made a sound that was half sob, half groan. He dropped his whiskey glass, the crystal shattering on the balcony floor, entirely forgotten. His arms wrapped around Elias's waist, pulling him flush against his body with desperate, overwhelming need. One of Julian's hands moved to the back of Elias's neck, his fingers tangling in Elias's messy brown hair, tilting his head up. Their eyes met for one final, breathless second. The hesitation was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the heavy, gravitational pull of two people who had finally stopped fighting the truth. Julian leaned down and kissed him. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was deep, hungry, and full of years of suppressed emotion and loneliness. It was a confession. Julian kissed Elias like he was the only source of oxygen left in the world. Elias gasped into the kiss, his arms wrapping tightly around Julian's broad shoulders, pulling him closer, kissing him back with just as much intensity. Julian's thumb caressed Elias's jaw, his touch turning surprisingly tender against the fierce passion of their lips. He held Elias as if the doctor were made of glass, something infinitely precious that Julian had finally been allowed to hold. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing heavily. Julian rested his forehead against Elias's, keeping his eyes closed. He was holding Elias so tightly, as if he expected the world to rip him away at any second. You're mine now, Julian whispered, his voice trembling with a possessive, fierce devotion. I don't care what it takes. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone touch you. You understand me? I love you, Elias. Elias smiled, a soft, genuine smile that brought tears to his eyes. He reached up, cupping Julian's cheek, feeling the slight stubble there. I know. I love you too, you idiot. Now take me inside. It's cold. Julian let out a breathless laugh, opening his eyes. For the first time since Elias had met him, Julian looked happy. The heavy burden of the underworld seemed to lift from his shoulders, just for a moment, replaced by the warm, solid reality of the man in his arms. He scooped Elias up into his arms, carrying him back inside the penthouse, the glass door sliding shut behind them, blocking out the noise of the city, leaving them in their own private, protected world. Things didn't become instantly perfect. Julian was still the underboss of the Moretti family. He still had a war to fight with the Rossi syndicate, but he fought it differently now. He wasn't just fighting for power anymore. He was fighting to build a world where Elias would be safe. Elias didn't go back to the underground clinic. It was too dangerous. Instead, Julian built him a state-of-the-art private medical facility within the safety of the Moretti territory. Elias still treated the poor. He still treated the vulnerable. But now, he had the absolute protection of the most powerful man in the city. Nobody dared to disrespect Dr. Thorne. Everyone in the underworld knew that if you even looked at Elias the wrong way, Julian Moretti would make sure you never looked at anything again. They became an unstoppable pair. the ruthless mafia boss, and the gentle, fearless doctor who was the only one who could calm the storm inside him. They were two opposites, bound together by loyalty, trust, and a love that grew stronger in the shadows. Julian learned how to be soft, and Elias learned how to be brave in a world of wolves. They had found their home in each other, and nothing, not the police, not rival families, not the darkness of the city, would ever pull them apart. And that is where we will leave our underboss and his doctor for tonight. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you felt the tension, the emotion, and the slow burn romance of Julian and Elias's story. Writing this kind of emotional, protective romance is my absolute favorite, and I hope you enjoyed the journey. Before you go, I want to give a massive thank you to everyone who supports me. And remember, if you want the continuation of the videos, bonus scenes, early access, and more uncensored 18+ BL content, I invite you to join us on SpicyTimeBL. Your support on Patreon is what keeps this channel alive, allowing me to bring these long, original stories to life without worrying about YouTube's restrictions. You can find the link in the description and the pinned comment. I would love to see you there. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I will see you in the next story. Goodbye for now.